It was a huge moment when the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu. The ICC has been used to, up to then, principally prosecuting, sending out arrest warrants for African leaders, people who aren't allied to any strong, powerful states and aren't particularly strong in their own right. International justice was not supposed to come for Western allies. And the full extent of the pressure that was put on the court to avoid pursuing Israel is still coming to light. So The Guardian has reported that ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan has told a court that Britain threatened to defund the International Court if it issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, so to completely defund it. Khan didn't name the official in question, but other reports have suggested the caller was then Foreign Secretary David Cameron. And on that call, which took place on the 23rd of April 2024, Khan was told that if he were to go ahead with the warrant, the UK could leave the Rome Statute altogether. So all that talk that our governments do about the importance of international law and human rights, they said, if you go after Israel, we're just going to leave the ICC. Obviously, we haven't left the ICC, but the threat was made. According to the chief prosecutor, in a separate call on May the 1st, the US Senator Lindsey Graham warned him that applying arrest warrants meant Hamas may shoot Israeli hostages, which I don't see what the logic would be there, but that was apparently another threat made by the Americans, I suppose, trying to sort of emotionally or morally blackmail him. And it was on the following day, according to Khan, this is what he says, that he first learned about the issue, which does seem to have ultimately brought him down, or at least taken him off the pitch when it comes to this prosecution. So this is from that Guardian story. Khan said he had learned for the first time about sexual misconduct allegations against him on the 2nd of May. He said that on the 6th of May, a third party revealed that someone without the alleged victim's consent had issued a complaint about his behaviour to the court's watchdog, the internal oversight mechanism. When the victim said she did not wish to pursue an investigation, the matter was dropped until an anonymous account on X started to reopen the allegations in October. So again, that's according to Karim Khan. Those allegations against Khan would become public the following May via an article in the Wall Street Journal. So that article reported on allegations made by an assistant in her 30s that she had been forced into unconsensual sex acts with Khan on numerous occasions, sort of in many different countries. She was said to be someone who travelled with Khan. In response to that story, Khan denied any misconduct. But the following week, he announced his decision to go on indefinite leave until any investigation into allegations of sexual assault could be concluded. So you have, according to Khan, you've got these threats being made to him by Western leaders. He doesn't sort of accede. He doesn't sort of give in to those threats. And then within a day or two, these allegations arise. And obviously, the timing of these allegations may make many viewers suspicious. This was a man being threatened by the most powerful states in the world, refusing to yield to their demands. There was then an allegation of sexual assault, and the man in charge of prosecuting Israel was suddenly taken off the pitch. Right? So suddenly, seems like this investigation isn't going so far because the guy who was taking the lead behind it is on gardening leave. In that Wall Street Journal, though, Wall Street Journal article, this is interesting. It's not a new article, but I hadn't read the whole of it before. They suggest the closeness in time between all of this. They also say it's not a coincidence, but they actually draw the causal arrows in the other direction. So they write this. So they say, the accusations facing Khan have become entwined with the international conflict over Gaza. Just 2.5 weeks after Khan learned of the allegations against him last spring, he surprised Israeli and US officials by announcing the most dramatic arrest warrant in the court's history for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It was the first time in the ICC's history that the court's prosecutor sought a warrant for a Western-aligned, democratically elected leader, a move the US had been working to avert for months. The timing of the announcement has spurred questions about whether Khan was aiming to protect himself from the sexual assault allegations. The day before announcing the warrant application, Khan abruptly cancelled a trip to Israel and Gaza that he had previously said was important to make his decision. So it was on the 20th of May that Karim Khan announced he had applied to the pre-trial chamber for the arrest warrant. So it was then that there was this pre-trial sort of request. It wasn't until October that the arrest warrant was actually put forward. The argument being made in the Wall Street Journal is that Karim Khan did this to shore up support among those ICC member states opposed to Israel. Very long articles. I suppose I'm bringing this up because in the story about Karim Khan, there was a lot of emphasis put on the timings. And I assume the emphasis being put on the timings is because the case Karim Khan is making is that he believes that the order of events was he suggested that he would prosecute Israel. Threats were made. He didn't sort of give in. And then these allegations emerged. And that obviously sort of feeds a theory that maybe these were somewhat trumped up to take him off the pitch. The alternate argument is that he had these allegations made against him. And so then to distract everyone and shore up support for himself, he decided to prosecute Israel.
Why would you do that? Why would you do that? I know.
I don't find that second
I'm about
one
to be accused of
plausible.
something. I'm about to be accused of something. I'm going to do something without global precedent in human history. I'm about to make myself a media figure with massive profile to distract away from me accused of sexual assault, sexual indiscretions. That doesn't make... I mean, I'm not suggesting he did or didn't do it. If that was his thinking, it's really dumb. He doesn't seem a very bright guy. It doesn't really seem a particularly coherent explanation, in my view. Yeah.
I mean, the allegations, so sort of, he's saying when these allegations were initially made, the complainant didn't want to go... She has now made sort of significant allegations publicly against him. So on this show, we're not going to go through whether or not they are valid or not. Obviously, we're not in a position to know, but I thought it would just be useful to sort of put forward those two alternate explanations and you can decide which one seems most plausible, or maybe neither. Maybe it is actually a coincidence that these two things happened at the same time. What I wanted to know from you, Aaron, I think something that we can sort of speak more confidently about is the claim that David Cameron threatened to defund the ICC if it went ahead with an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, isn't it funny? The Tories were hung out to dry. The electorate had their guts for garters last summer in 2024. One of the major reasons was, of course, immigration, a perceived crisis around immigration, asylum, refugees. And not once did the Tories say, we are going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which would have been a very easy thing to do, to say it, not to actually deliver and execute on it, but to say it would have been a very easy thing to do. They've never once said that, as I understand it, until more recently you've had sort of outriders like Suella Braverman or, we should at least consider it. But when they were in power, serious figures never really said we should leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which wouldn't stop the boats. But there's an argument that it would help. It would give the government in this country at Westminster more tools to deal with it. Okay. So even though that probably would have given them a couple more % in the polls, right? Certainly would have helped. It wouldn't have hurt. It wouldn't have hurt the Conservatives going into the last election talking about withdrawing Britain from the European Convention on Human Rights. It wouldn't have hurt them. Never heard it, though. And yet they're willing to say, we will defund the ICC. Nothing to do with this country. It's not going to save David Cameron's skin. It's not going to save Rishi Sunak as PM, but because of what you may or may not do in relation to a foreign country. A foreign country which, by the way, killed 3 of David Cameron's compatriots who were working as aid workers, who were killed by the IDF. They were former service personnel. And the response from the British government at the time was, the IDF, you investigate this yourselves. So it seems to me we have something of a picture with regards to particularly the previous government and how it related to the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Subordination, deference, genuflection, We're on our knees. It seems very clear to me that for whatever reason, much of the British political class is cowed by Israel. But that's not just true of Labour, who are in charge now, it's also true of the Tories. And here's an amazing statistic, which I think might help clarify as to why that is. Before the last general election, of course, the Conservative Party were in government. They had a sizable majority. Over 70% of all Conservative MPs in the House of Commons were members of Conservative Friends of Israel. And these are exactly the kinds of campaign that the domestic pro-Israel lobby operates through. They would be incensed at the idea that Britain would be funding the ICC, would give legitimacy to the ICC, that the ICC would do something like this. The idea that the ICC would apply the same standards that it does to African dictators or Putin to Benjamin Netanyahu. So I think it's quite obvious why Cameron is willing to defund the ICC, but they weren't willing to talk about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights more generally. And a lot of it, in my view, is to do with the strength of the domestic Israel lobby. They probably made some kind of political calculation. You know what? Not unreasonably. If we're on the wrong side of this, that's a bigger hit to us than I think most people are willing to publicly state. You know, we can paint Labour as anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. Of course, they tried. They tried very hard to do all that. Labour's defence mechanism was to basically have a cigarette paper between them and the Tories on most things relating to Israel. So pretty hard to make that land. So I think there's a clear issue here, and it's being catalysed by the domestic Zionist/Israel lobby.
Yeah, I suppose we didn't, so this was a sort of preemptive threat, and then he did put out an arrest warrant, and we didn't leave the ICC, but there had been a change of government by then. So who knows what would have happened if David Cameron was still Foreign Secretary. Let's go on to another story about this, which, so there were lots of uncertainties when it came to sort of the first angle we were talking about here. It requires significant, proper investigation. This story, though, is absolutely confirmed, and it's crazy. So it's showing the extent to which the US will go to protect Israel from accountability. This is from the Associated Press, and it's sort of been syndicated in the Times of Israel. So it says, ICC officials confront curbs to travel, finances, in face of sweeping US sanctions. So it's a report on judges and prosecutors at the ICC who are struggling to live and work under the kind of US sanctions usually reserved for autocrats or crime bosses. So these are judges and prosecutors, like the most sort of professional people one can imagine. They're being treated like they're kind of mafiosos. So this is from that Times of Israel article. The court's top prosecutor, British national Karim Khan, had his bank accounts closed and his US visa revoked, while Microsoft cancelled his ICC email address. Canadian judge Kimberly Prost, who was named in the latest round of sanctions in August, immediately lost access to her credit cards. Amazon's Alexa stopped responding to her. Your whole world is restricted, Prost told the Associated Press last week. And then it goes on. Businesses and individuals risk substantial US fines and prison time if they provide sanctioned people with financial, material, or technological support, forcing many to stop working with them. Shortly after she was listed, Prost bought an e-book, The Queen's Necklace by Antal Zerb, only to later find it had disappeared from her device. It's the uncertainty, she said. They are small annoyances, but they accumulate. Deputy Prosecutor Nazhat Shamim Khan echoed her colleagues' concerns, saying, "You're never quite sure when your card is not working somewhere, whether this is just a glitch or whether this is the sanction." Now, I should say, some of these sanctions and some of the accounts given here, lots of them relate to Israel. Some of them also related to when the ICC was planning to investigate war crimes in Afghanistan. So this is as much about sort of the brute force of the Americans as it is about Israel. But this is crazy. Like your Alexa stops responding to you. And the reason the Alexa stops responding to you is because Amazon could be sued if they gave this judge tech support, because giving her tech support. So like if she calls up and says, my laptop's broken, can you fix my laptop? Then you could be like, well, if I fix your laptop, I could be committing international crimes because I'm supporting a sanctioned person. So you have become a non-person because you have dared to go outside what the Americans consider acceptable.
Big tech and the American internet is a tool for imperialism, right? And I don't think people have begun to get their heads around this. There was a judge recently who gave Joe Barton a suspended sentence. I'm sure you saw this. I'm sure you saw or heard about this. And there were people on X saying that the American state should sanction the judge that gave the sentence to Joe Barton. Crazy right-wingers on X. You know what? In 12 months' time, that's the kind of thing we might be looking at. And that might sound crazy, but we are so dependent on the American internet for almost every single aspect of our lives, we're very vulnerable. Look at this show. You're probably watching this on YouTube. The tools that we use to edit it Adobe tools. We'll publish this on Meta platforms, maybe on an Alphabet platform. We're using YouTube, obviously. Other platforms too. TikTok, of course. Mr. Ellison now has that. You might support Novara Media. Of course, you should support Novara Media. Go to support.novaramedia.com. We use Stripe, I think. We don't use American servers, but guess who do? Much the British government and the British security services. Keir Starmer, if he pisses off the Americans sufficiently tomorrow, let's say they use Microsoft Teams at number 10, gone, right? Let's say he has a Visa card, gone. Try use Apple Pay on the tube to get to work, gone. We are so dependent now upon US infrastructure, and we've got increasingly dependent over the last 25 years. It's actually frightening. And it's now time that as a country, we start building in resilience and also talking about the construction of a post-American internet. Because without a post-American internet, countries aren't going to have meaningful sovereignty, right? We're not going to have meaningful sovereignty. Organizations like the ICC will not be able to meaningfully exist because the Americans can basically just, I don't know if you've seen Enemy of the State.
I haven't.
Enemy of the State. I think it was originally with Gene Hackman and then it was remade with Will Smith, and the state basically tries to, you're a wanted man by the state, your cards don't work, nothing works, the security services are after you. They don't need to do that anymore, right? They don't need people chasing you. They just need to debank you. They need to cut your cards. They need to cut your digital ID and digital products that you use. That's it. You can't access Amazon. That's it.
Well, you might not be able to access. So this is obviously the ebook disappearing from your device.
That's DRM, right?
What does DRM stand for?
Digital rights management. So that's a rare example of a good which can just be turned off. A really good example of this is the John Deere tractors in Ukraine. The Russians took a bunch of John Deere tractors. They're produced in the United States. John Deere, they have a kill switch. We didn't know this before. We now know they do because they were just turned off remotely from the US. I suspect the same, by the way, is true for that MacBook. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's said because it's not rare now. That's the model of so many products we have. Like if you have Tesla, then this is what you're talking about with Cory Doctorow. If you have a Tesla, then you have to pay a subscription fee to get the sort of premium product, which gives you full self-driving, whatever, and lets you charge your battery to sort of the full amount. But obviously, the corollary of that is if you suddenly get sanctioned and you're driving your Tesla, then presumably they're within their rights. Well, no, it's not even they're within their rights. Maybe they're obligated to turn off the system.
Yeah.
So it's not just that your card and stuff, you can't purchase new things. It's that the things you already own in your house just start to gradually turn off.
Your phone, your laptop,
your fridge,
your car.
Fridges have subscriptions now. So this is very worrying. Yeah, I mean, this laptop, presumably they can. Can you? I'll ask ChatGPT in the break.